Folks, Bryan Reynolds is hitting baseballs and doing it a lot. And that only spells really good things for the Pittsburgh Pirates moving forward, and I'm going to tell you why.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Ethan Smith. I am a diehard Pittsburgh Pirates fan, and I have been my entire life, and I love channeling that diehard fandom of the Pittsburgh Pirates into a podcast for you every single Monday through Friday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. We're live on YouTube, so we'll obviously be reading some comments here today on the show. And when you're starting to talk about what the Pirates have been doing over the last, I'd say, month, I'd give it about a month and change now, really since Policygenius arrived on the scene, you're starting to see things kind of click now for certain players. And one of those players, of course, being Bryan Reynolds, who was the big difference in the win today for the Pittsburgh Pirates over the Cincinnati Reds, having the only run of the game on a solo shot in the eighth inning that ended up being the difference, ended up winning a massive series against a divisional rival in the Cincinnati Reds in a game they needed to have. And Bryan Reynolds has just continued to hit the baseball and hit the baseball well, folks. In the Cincinnati series alone, he had 5 hits in this 3-game series, 1 home run, 2 RBIs, and 2 runs scored in this series. So Bryan Reynolds is doing good things. And that's what they extended him for a couple of years ago. They extended him to be this guy in the Pirates lineup at the top of the lineup. Be the guy that if this team's offense is struggling, you can count on. And that's what you saw over the last 2 days against 2 very good pitchers in Hunter Green and Nick Lodolo, who are very impressive players. And the Pirates lost last night 2-1 in a very tough loss, but they managed to find a way to win today with the help of Bryan Reynolds, who, mind you, over the last 30 games that he's played, this only gets better as it goes, by the way, and I love reading it. Over the last 30 games, Bryan Reynolds has a .299 average, a .331 OPS or on-base percentage, and a .496 slugging with 5 home runs and 21 RBIs. You move that down to the last 15 games, .339, .379, .581 with 2 homers and 8 RBIs, and then over his last 7, he's batting .345, .387, and slugging .655. Bryan Reynolds, folks, playing this well only spells good things for this team. And there's a reason for that. Because we talk all the time about Bryan Reynolds when he's not doing all that great and saying, this is just who he is. This is the player that he is. But you also get this Bryan Reynolds just about every year in the middle of the season where he just goes on an absolute tear. And that's what he's doing right now. And when you start to notice with Bryan Reynolds, when he starts really going on these long streaks and really hitting the baseball well, it's contagious. You start seeing Ke'Bryan Hayes start to get on base a little bit more. They throw Nick Gonzalez in the cleanup spot with how things are going. Even O'Neal Cruz, who has had his struggles as of late a little bit, starts to get going every now and then, especially when Bryan Reynolds does what he does. And I've said it in years past about Bryan Reynolds and kind of player that he is. He's kind of the conductor of the offensive train. He's kind of the guy that can really get things going. O'Neal Cruz is the same way at the top of the lineup. When those guys are going and they're feeding down to the bottom part of the lineup, and you look at those guys and you look at what Bryan Reynolds has done over the past couple of weeks, it just becomes this really weird, contagious feeling around the team where everybody starts hitting. And I want to bring this up as well that Mark brought up. Rowdy Tellez is hitting over 400 this month. June has just been a good month for this offense for the most part. Now, don't get me wrong. I can completely understand being frustrated with today's game where they only score one run, but I will also say Nick Lodolo and Hunter Green are very good young pitchers on this Reds roster that the Pirates are going to have to eventually figure out. Now, thankfully, and we'll get to this a little bit later on the show when we talk about Mitch Keller, and then we'll also be talking about choosing some former Buccos back from the old time 2013 through 2015 teams just for a little bit of fun. But when we talk about Keller later, the Pirates can go hit for hit with anybody in terms of starting pitching right now. And when they get healthy, as I talked about a little bit yesterday, it's going to be that much better. So pair that you have starters that you know you can rely on. And Bryan Reynolds, in his post-game interview with Hannah Mears, even said he loves playing behind Mitch Keller because he knows Mitch is going to go out there and perform and go out there and do good things. And when Bryan Reynolds is performing, the offense just performs better. You can go back and look at any statistical month where Bryan Reynolds had a very good month, at least when the teams were a little bit better. We obviously remember 2021 Bryan Reynolds, which was the best version of Bryan Reynolds, but that was not a very good team. 2022 was also not the greatest team, but you could kind of tell that the team was playing better when Bryan Reynolds was playing better. Last season, he had kind of a shaky year every once in a while, but he also had these stretches where he was nuts, and that's when the team was performing. You're seeing it again. They won against the Cincinnati Reds. They win the series against the Rockies. Yeah, they lost the series to the Cardinals, but they won 4 out of their last 5 series, and a large part of that has been because of the offensive efforts that we've seen from Bryan Reynolds. Now, do you want Bryan to kind of improve from the right side of the plate? Of course you do. The left side of the plate, he's doing pretty okay. He's doing good on both sides, but you really wish that he could be just a consistent force on the left side of the plate too, because this team desperately needs that left-handed power. And you see John Gorman bringing it up about, I really don't know what to do with Sawinski at this point. Tellez has been a big reason why you're also starting to see this team kind of have these breaks that they're getting in these offensive games or lack thereof, where they still find a way to win because they're getting production from the left side of the field now. And Cody even says, I think Nick Gonzalez needs to move back to 6 in the lineup. I feel like there's too much pressure on him as a cleanup guy. I can agree with that as well, but also with how good he's been with runners batted in, including the fact that you have Bryan Reynolds hitting the ball. And this was actually the point I was about to get to, is that he just makes everybody around him better when he's performing like this. You kind of want to have a guy in Nick Gonzalez who can be around Bryan Reynolds in the order. And I wouldn't even mind having him as the 3 guy and then having Cruz as the cleanup hitter. I think that's something that I would like to see in the coming weeks or in the coming games. But I think that you want to have those guys that have been performing well near Bryan Reynolds right now because he's just that good of a player at this current moment. I mean, when you're hitting .299 over your last 30 games, and currently, if you want to look real quick, I believe in the month of June, he's just absolutely tearing the cover off the ball. Yeah, I mean, he's batting .343 in the month of June with a .600 slugging. You're going to take that all the time, and it's no coincidence that when Bryan Reynolds is doing these things for this team, the team is going to be better in turn. That is the kind of player that Bryan Reynolds is. He is the conductor of the offensive train. He is the guy that when he is performing, he is going to help this team more often than not win baseball games. And it's no shock that they've won 4 out of their last 5 series. And you go look at Bryan Reynolds' stats that I just named off for you for June, and they're having a very solid month. Now, Bryan Reynolds was not the only reason the Pirates won this game today. Mitch Keller had yet another phenomenal start under his belt for the Pittsburgh Pirates in a shutout effort. Could he get an all-star bid again? And he shouldn't be under Skeens and Jones' shadow. I'll tell you why in just a second, everybody. Today's episode of Locked On Pirates is brought to you by eBay Motors. Millions of parts for your MVP, and you win every single time with parts that fit your ride. Because passion, drive, and patience are the formula for winning championships and also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay has got you covered with everything because they have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode of Locked On Pirates is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. And with the way Bryan Reynolds is swinging the bat, don't you think you want to make some money off of it too? You can include Bryan Reynolds in your Prize Picks entries. All you have to do is just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Because with Prize Picks, you can do that in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer, and you can make a lineup in as little as 60 seconds. With baseball season only really being the only sport you got left, you can bet on everything from Bryan Reynolds hits to O'Neal Cruz home runs to Mitch Keller strikeouts. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100 and pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. And of course, thank you to eBay Motors and Prize Picks for always sponsoring the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Ethan Smith. You guys should also check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and Amazon Fire TV, giving you all of your sports news every single day from the local hosts like myself of the Locked On Podcast Network. And if you guys watched the game today, which I assume you did, I spoke about Bryan Reynolds. Obviously, he was the difference in winning the game, but he was not the only big difference in winning the game as Mitch Keller, folks. Before we get into anything about Mitch Keller right now, I always anytime I talk about him, I always love to bring up the fact that Mitch Keller was a guy that a lot of people gave up on a very long time ago. About 2 or 3 years ago, it really truthfully looked like Mitch Keller was never going to find a place in this league as a starting pitcher. It looked like he was just going to be stuck in the void forever. And he got out of it. And he was an all-star last season. He got his first opening day nod last season, got another one this season. And a lot of people before the season started this year were kind of wondering, because he had kind of that teetering off a little bit after the All-Star break last season, was he going to be able to replicate it? He gets the big extension. He's going to be here for a while. He's going to be a part of this rotation, a rotation that now features 2 of the best young pitchers in baseball in Policygenius and Jared Jones. Pin that because we'll talk about that in a minute. Mitch Keller has answered every single call and some. I mean, you look at May, and we all know about the month of May that Mitch Keller had. 4-0, 1.30 ERA was absolutely nuts. And you were wondering, how long could he keep that up? Would it be something that he could keep up consistently? And guess what? He has. Folks, in the month of June, Mitch Keller has a 1.80 ERA in 4 starts. In all of those starts, as he's done in pretty much every single start that he's made for the past 2 seasons, he's went at least 6 innings in all of those starts, including 7 innings today against the Cincinnati Reds, who he absolutely dominated in this game. 7 strikeouts, 2 walks, only 2 hits allowed on the day against the Reds lineup that, albeit might not be that great, does have some killers like Elly De La Cruz. Mitch Keller, folks, you look at what he's up against in the National League as far as all-star bids are concerned. And he is easily, I think, in that conversation, especially with what he's done so far in the month of June. And you consider that in the month of May, he went 27 2/3 innings. He's going to more than eclipse that before the month of June is done. He's going to. And his ERA is a 1.80, as you heard me mention. And you look at him, and like how I mentioned with Reynolds, his last 15 games, which would include pretty much every start that he's had this year, he's a 3.11 ERA guy in 15 starts this year. And in his last 7 starts, so about half of his season, in his last 7 starts, he's 5-1 with a 1.65 ERA, 41 strikeouts and 8 walks. And in those 7 starts, he's only allowed 8 runs. So when you talk about the Pirates pitching staff right now, nationally and locally, you're going to hear a lot of talk about Paul Skeens and Jared Jones because they have helped elevate this starting pitching staff to a new level to where it's one of the best in all of Major League Baseball. But Mitch Keller undoubtedly has to be a part of that conversation and should not be in the shadow of Skeens or Jones. Now, could you argue that Paul Skeens is a better pitcher than Mitch Keller? You sure can. Can you argue that Jared Jones is a better pitcher than Mitch Keller? Bit tougher to argue that if you're not bringing up Paul Skeens. But when you have now this dynamic that they've built in this rotation, where you have Mitch Keller, you have Paul Skeens, and you have Jared Jones, if that stays healthy, knock on wood as I always do, you'll hear me doing it right now, knock on whatever you can to keep those guys healthy. You have Bailey Falter, who's been a steady 4th option. You're eventually going to get back Martin Perez, who has been going through his rehab and seems to be nearing a return in the short future. Once you get him back and you're not having these bullpen games every couple days, you're going to be playing with house money every day with this starting pitching staff because it's just been that good. It's top 5 in Major League Baseball in quality starts. Mitch Keller leading the team in that category for good reason. And it's okay to talk so much about Paul Skeens. I mean, I do it on this very show once a week when he starts, but you don't need to put Mitch Keller in his shadow because these guys collectively are making the starting pitching staff a unit that is to be reckoned with across Major League Baseball. I mean, you look into the series that they're going to play next against the Tampa Bay Rays. They have the pitching. They have the pitching advantage in that series. They just do. Then you look at the series against the Reds again. You can argue they have the pitching advantage in that series. Atlanta doesn't have Spencer Strider right now. They have the advantage in that series, I think, starting pitching-wise. There's only a handful, if that, of rotations in baseball that you can look at, folks, that are really going to set, you could confidently say, are better than the Pittsburgh Pirates rotation. And over the past couple of years, that would sound ludicrous to say. That would sound absolutely, you would be sent to the loony bin if you were even arguing that the Pirates rotation was a top unit in baseball. Because look at even last season when it was really just Mitch Keller and Johan Oviedo. That was really all you had, especially after you traded Jose Quintana. Now you have a 3-headed monster headlined by the best starting pitching prospect we've seen since Steven Strasburg, another Rookie of the Year candidate in Jared Jones, and Mitch Keller, who was an all-star last season and in all rights should be again this year. And really, if you want me to take it a step further, if he does finish the month of June off and does very good in the month of June, throw Mitch Keller in the Cy Young conversation. Because that is a conversation that he has not only garnered respect to be in, but he's earned that right. Mitch Keller has earned that right to be in that conversation among the best pitchers in the National League right now. Undoubtedly. And having him in the shadow of Skeens and Jones, fine, I get it. But Mitch Keller, so far this season, has been their most consistent starter, even due to the slow start that he had. Since the calendar turned away from April, Mitch Keller has turned into an absolute beast. And he does not look like he's going to be stopped anytime soon. Because he goes out there with confidence. He goes out there and does his thing. He goes out there and uses his immense pitching arsenal, and he makes opposing offenses look silly. And he had a great May. He's having another elite June. And if he continues to do it, I see no way that you keep Mitch Keller out of the All-Star game, and I see no way that you can't include him in the conversation every single time you bring up this Pirates starting rotation because he has earned that right. Yesterday on Twitter, I asked all of you, and a lot of you are watching this live right now, so you could still pitch in. If you could bring one Pittsburgh Pirate back from the playoff teams of 2013 through 2015, who would it be? Let's have a little fun and talk about it here on the final part of today's episode of Locked On Pirates. Folks, a lot of life can be very unpredictable, and you can get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance at PolicygeniusCheck.com, because Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family super easy and super quick. Because with Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and even let you avoid unnecessary medical claims. Policygenius helps you easily compare your options from America's top insurers in just a few clicks, and their award-winning agents can even walk you through the process step by step. Your work life insurance policy may not offer you enough protection for your family's needs, and even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policygenius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. So head to PolicygeniusCheck.com to get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance today, or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's PolicygeniusCheck.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Tax Network USA. Visit taxnetworkusa.com or tnusa.com/lockedon, because here on Locked On Pirates, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It's year-round. And you know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. So don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. See the link in this episode description below and make sure the IRS doesn't come after you. And folks, welcome back to the final part of today's episode of Locked On Pirates, this live edition of Locked On Pirates, a Pirates team that has now won 4 of their last 5 series and playing some very good baseball as of late. And on Twitter yesterday, I asked all of you to name me one player that you would bring back from the 2013 through 2015 Pirate teams. Of course, the last time they made the playoffs, and why. Why would you bring them back? Mark shares already. This was my pick. Starling Marte was my pick. I would be a big Marte guy if he was able to come back. The Mets, interesting team. They've won a lot of games since Grimace threw out the first pitch. They're a very interesting team. Marte on a bit of a healthy contract, so you take that into account as well. But outside of Bryan Reynolds, you kind of look at the offense and what you're getting right now from this team in the offense. Jack Sawinski has struggled a ton. Saw a lot of you guys bring that up in the comments today. Michael A. Taylor is a defensive specialist. The bat doesn't exactly come along with him. Then you have Connor Joe, who slowed down quite a bit as well over the past couple weeks, and Edward Olivares is kind of up and down as well. Bringing a guy like Marte back, especially if you got the 2013 through 2015 versions of Marte, would be an absolutely phenomenal addition to this team, because they desperately need some offensive help outside of Bryan Reynolds in the outfield, and Marte would be a great addition. And Matt Helmer it seems to agree as well. I am kind of just going over the consensus here, a little bit of a lot of the answers I saw. Russell Martin was a big one that I saw from a lot of you, seeing as, you know, the Pirates have had their issues with the catcher position this year. Yasmani Grandal being part of that. He's kind of had his issues. Henry Davis has not really elevated his play like we all thought he might be able to do this season. Jason DeLay has been hurt for a good portion of the year. He's been okay since he arrived back on the big league roster, but you would love to have that solid starting catcher who can also give you some offense. Russell Martin, from 2013 through 2015, did exactly that. And he would fix a ton of issues on this team. Obviously doesn't play anymore, but that's why we're doing this for fun, because I thought it'd be fun to bring up. Now, a lot of you also brought up A.J. Burnett. I think A.J. Burnett would just be an awesome addition to this team as well. You look at what this pitching staff already is that we just talked about with Keller, Jones, and Skeens. Then you bring A.J. Burnett into the fold. That would just create chaos, and you'd have Bailey Falter, Martin Perez, Marco Gonzalez, if he eventually comes back. That would just be an absolute unit out of the rotation. The one that I like a lot, though, that a lot of you guys brought up was Pedro Alvarez. Seeing now that you have the DH, Pedro wouldn't be forced to play the outfield or third base or first base if they didn't need him to. And as I've mentioned on this show a lot, they need left-handed power on this team. El Toro was that guy. He was hitting 30 home runs a year at PNC Park. His swing at PNC Park was absolutely beautiful. You couldn't make it up with how he would put the ball over the Clemente wall with ease. He could be in a DH role now. Obviously, that would take a little bit away from Andrew McCutchen, but you could kind of have a fun dynamic there too with a platoon DH option with Kutch facing lefties and Pedro facing righties. Or you could just play Alvarez at first base if you wanted to and see if you could fix his defense just a tad. But man, would El Toro be a phenomenal addition to this squad. I saw a lot of you guys bring up Tony Watson and Jared Hughes and Mark Melanson a lot as well to kind of help supplement this bullpen that has had its issues as well. And I think those would be phenomenal additions as well. I don't think you can really go wrong with any of the additions that you guys brought up. I thought that it would be a fun little idea to bring those up to you guys because it's interesting, because then it also kind of makes you think about what you want to get this trade deadline if the Pirates are in the position to buy. Zachary Zimmerman brings up what would it take to get Luis Robert Jr. from the White Sox trade-wise, or what would you give up to get him? It would be quite a bit. Luis is on a pretty friendly deal. I believe he's making about $8 million a year, maybe $8.8 million a year for quite a while. So you're going to have him for a good bit if you get him. So you're obviously going to have to give up some top guys. You're probably talking like Bubba Chandler. Termar Johnson's name for sure would get involved. Mitch Jeb, who they drafted last season, I'm sure would be involved in those conversations. They'd obviously probably want an outfielder in return as well, like Lonnie White Jr., I think would be a big guy. Maybe even a Matt Gorski would be a guy you'd have to bring up, but it would take a lot to get Luis Robert Jr., and I would be all for it. He's one of my favorite players in baseball, and if the Pirates are truly going to want to go for it, that would be the kind of move to do it. You're just really concerned about his health at this point. He's a guy that's hurt quite a bit, so you kind of worry about that. And we'll be talking about trade deadline stuff probably as we get closer to July. So that's something you guys can expect on the show. On tomorrow's show, it'll be myself and the guys from Locked On Reds as we recap the series that we just watched. We can even go ahead and look ahead to the matchup with the Cincinnati Reds next week. And then on Friday, we'll be talking about the Tampa Bay Rays series, Tampa Bay Rays series here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is Ethan Smith. You can follow me on Twitter right there at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. You can find this show where you found its live edition of Locked On Pirates on YouTube and all of your audio platforms, free and available to you every Monday through Friday. Have a beautiful rest of your Wednesday afternoon and evening. See you tomorrow. But until then, we'll see you on the flip side.